are commencing legal action against Mrs. Meghan Markle. Her televised allegations, particularly the Oprah interview, have inflicted undue harm upon the royal family. An apology no longer suffices. The matter will now proceed through the...
A royal return should have been simple. A son comes home, children meet their grandfather, and an old family wound is given one quiet chance to soften. But around Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, and Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, nothing inside the royal story is simple anymore. One security question has reopened a much larger mystery. Because what appears on the surface to be a dispute over protection is, in reality, a test of something far more delicate: whether the British royal family can still separate private family feeling from public royal structure. Reports suggest that Harry has been exploring ways to bring Meghan, Prince Archie, and Princess Lilibet back to the United Kingdom, but concerns over security have once again placed that possibility under strain. And immediately, royal watchers began asking the question Buckingham Palace has not fully answered in public. Is this about safety alone, or is it about the boundaries of royal life after departure? That distinction matters because security, inside the royal world, is never only about who walks beside a car or who stands outside a door. It is a visible sign of status, responsibility, public risk, and institutional belonging. For working royals, protection is tied to official duty. For those who have stepped away, the situation becomes far more complicated. Harry has argued for years that he does not feel safe bringing his family to Britain without proper police protection, while the system around royal security has treated his changed position as central to how protection is assessed. That is where a family matter becomes an institutional matter, and once an issue enters that territory, emotion no longer controls the outcome. For King Charles III, that creates one of the most painful contradictions of his reign. As a father and grandfather, the king may naturally wish for time with his younger son's children, especially when the distance between California and Britain has already become symbolic of the wider family divide. But as monarch, Charles cannot simply bend royal structures around private longing. The crown survives by making roles clear, by protecting public confidence, and by avoiding arrangements that appear uncertain or inconsistent. So when people ask why a visit involving grandchildren can become so difficult, the answer may lie in that uncomfortable space between love and duty. And this is why the latest discussion carries such emotional weight. It is not only about whether Archie and Lilibet might step onto British soil. It is about what their arrival would represent. Would it suggest a warmer chapter between Harry and the king? Would it become a sign that the Sussexes are being quietly welcomed closer to the institution again? Or would it simply be a private family visit, separate from royal status, royal privilege, and royal duty? In monarchy, symbols often matter as much as statements. A residence, a route, a police presence, even the absence of a photograph, can become part of the public story before anyone has explained what it means. That is the tension now surrounding Harry and Meghan. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex are not ordinary private citizens in the public imagination, yet they are no longer working representatives of the monarchy. They still carry royal titles, but they do not carry the same official role. They remain part of the king's family, but they stand outside the daily structure of Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace. That in-between position has created confusion from the very beginning, and every new dispute seems to return to the same unresolved question. Can someone remain emotionally close to the monarchy while institutionally separate from it? Some royal commentators believe this is the true issue beneath the security debate. Not whether Harry loves his family, not whether Charles cares about his grandchildren, not whether reconciliation is emotionally desirable. The deeper issue is whether any gesture toward closeness could blur the hard line established after Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties. If official protection is expanded, some observers may see it as recognition of continuing royal risk. Others may interpret it as a partial return to royal privilege. And for an institution already navigating public scrutiny, changing expectations, and the future reign of Prince William, the Prince of Wales, ambiguity can become dangerous. Yet it would be too simple and too harsh to describe this only as cold institutional calculation. Families do not stop being families because titles change. A father remains a father. A son remains a son. Grandchildren grow older, whether palace doors open or not. That is why the emotional side of his story continues to grip so many viewers. People understand the ache of distance. They understand how pride, hurt, and principle can turn months into years. And they understand that sometimes the hardest separations are not created by one dramatic break, but by many smaller decisions that slowly make return feel less possible. That question becomes sharper because of the children. Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet are not responsible for the decisions that reshape their parents' lives. Yet their relationship with Britain, with the House of Windsor, and with their grandfather is now shaped by the consequences of those decisions. For older royal viewers who remember decades of royal family history, that detail carries a special sadness. The monarchy has survived abdication, divorce, scandal, grief, and reinvention, but family distance always leaves a different kind of mark. It is quieter than a headline, but sometimes more lasting. And perhaps that is why this moment feels larger than another episode in the Sussex story. It touches the very heart of what King Charles's reign has been asked to manage. A smaller working monarchy, a strained family, a public that wants transparency, and a future that depends on trust. The king cannot afford decisions that look purely emotional, but he also cannot escape the fact that the monarchy is built on family symbolism. When the family appears divided, the institution feels the tremor. When the institution tightens its rules, the family feels the cost. So was this security dispute merely a logistical problem, or was it the latest sign that the royal door has become narrower than many people hoped? That remains the central question. What is clear is that every conversation about Harry, Meghan, and a possible return to the United Kingdom now carries more meaning than the itinerary itself. Behind the travel plans sits a deeper test of loyalty, reputation, and the future royal order. And to understand why this one unresolved visit has stirred such powerful reaction, we have to look back at the moment when the line between family and institution first became impossible to ignore. That line first became impossible to ignore after the Sussexes stepped away from working royal life. What looked at first like a personal family decision quickly became an institutional question. Could a prince remain close enough to the crown to carry its protection, visibility, and symbolism, while no longer carrying the daily burden of representing it? At the time, the public conversation was filled with emotion. Many people saw a young family seeking independence, a couple exhausted by scrutiny, and a monarchy trying to keep its dignity through a painful rupture. But beneath the emotion was a colder royal problem. The system had to decide who served, who spoke, who was funded, who was protected, and who still carried the authority of the sovereign in public. Once Harry and Meghan moved outside the working structure, every one of those questions had to be redrawn. That is why the early settlement around their departure mattered so deeply. The idea of a partial royal role, often discussed as a half-in, half-out arrangement, may have sounded reasonable to some viewers. Harry and Meghan could live independently, build their own life abroad, and still return for selected royal moments. But for Buckingham Palace, that would have created a gray zone, and gray zones are dangerous inside monarchy. The crown survives through visible certainty, not emotional improvisation. The public must know who represents the king and who acts as a private individual. That clarity protects the monarchy from confusion, criticism, and accusations of special treatment. If one couple could keep the public symbolism of royalty while choosing a more independent life, every future decision would be judged against that precedent. And once royal precedent exists, it rarely stays small. It follows the institution and becomes a problem for the next reign as much as the present one. This is where security became far more than a technical issue. Protection is not only about physical danger, even though that is the part most people understand first. In royal life, protection also signals official connection. A figure surrounded by state-level security appears, to many eyes, to remain inside a circle of national responsibility. That is why the question became so sensitive after Harry's role changed. His public profile did not disappear, but his formal position had changed, and the machinery around the monarchy had to respond in a way that could stand beyond one emotional case. For Harry, that may feel deeply personal. He was born into a world where protection was part of life, not something requested from the outside. His name, his mother's history, his military service, and his global visibility all carry meanings no ordinary person could fully understand. So when he speaks about security, Supporters hear a father trying to protect his wife and children from risks created by royal birth and public attention. Whether one agrees with him or not, the emotional argument is powerful because it sounds human before it sounds constitutional. But the palace cannot operate only from that human side. If every painful family circumstance became a reason to reopen rules built around public duty, the institution would soon lose the clarity it depends upon. That does not mean there is no feeling behind the walls. It means feeling is filtered through responsibility. King Charles may understand the sadness of distance, but the king also inherits a system where compassion must not appear to weaken structure. And that is where the private father and the public monarch begin to pull against each other. This is also why William's future role shadows the conversation. The Prince of Wales does not need to comment publicly on every Sussex development for his position to matter. He is the continuity after Charles. He is the next structure. He is the person who may one day have to defend any boundary drawn too loosely today. Some royal watchers believe this explains why the future king's approach appears more guarded. That remains interpretation, not confirmed private fact, but it fits the wider logic of succession planning. And succession planning is not only about who wears the crown next. It is about what kind of monarchy that future sovereign receives. A smaller working royal family depends on discipline, fewer people carrying clearer duties, fewer blurred lines between service and celebrity, fewer questions about support and status. In that model, every exception matters. Every special arrangement becomes a public lesson in what the monarchy is willing to allow. This is why Meghan's position remains symbolically powerful. She is no longer a working royal, yet her presence can change the temperature of royal coverage instantly. A possible appearance in Britain would not be treated as ordinary travel. It would be examined for meaning, where she stayed, whether the children met the king, whether any photograph appeared, whether Catherine was nearby, whether William was absent, whether the tone looked warm or controlled. In another family, these details might mean little. In the House of Windsor, they become signals. And that is the part Buckingham Palace cannot easily escape. Even when a visit is described as private, the world searches for official meaning. Even when the security process is separate from family emotion, people connect the two because the story involves a father, a son, a daughter-in-law, and grandchildren. The institution may draw neat lines on paper, but public feeling does not move in neat lines. That is why Archie and Lilibet sit at the emotional center of the story, even though they are not responsible for any of it. They are the king's grandchildren, part of the royal family tree, yet their childhood is unfolding mostly outside the country whose history helped shape their titles. The security debate, therefore, becomes about more than protection. It becomes about whether distance becomes normal and whether the next generation grows up knowing the monarchy as family, history, or something seen mostly from afar. So when reports suggest that a return visit is complicated by protection concerns, the real weight lies in what those concerns reveal. They show how one decision from years ago continues to shape every later possibility. They show how private hopes can be trapped inside public systems. They show how a monarchy built on family symbolism can still struggle to repair a family wound without risking institutional confusion. And once that truth becomes visible, the story moves beyond security and into something far more sensitive. Because the next question is not simply whether Harry and Meghan can come back safely. It is whether anyone inside the royal structure still has the power or the willingness to make a return feel possible without changing what the monarchy has already decided. That question placed the story in a different light, because the issue was no longer confined to Harry's security, Meghan's public image, or one possible family visit. It became a test of who now controls the emotional borders of the monarchy, and whether those borders are being shaped by affection, caution, or the cold logic of succession. For years, the royal family has survived by absorbing personal pain into public discipline. It rarely explains every decision, and it almost never allows private emotion to become the language of official policy. But the Sussex question has always challenged that method, because Harry and Meghan do not sit quietly on the edge of the royal story. They remain central to global attention, and that attention means even a small shift around them can look like a major palace signal. That is why the current tension feels less like one disagreement and more like a mirror held up to the entire institution. The monarchy is trying to present steadiness at a time when its future depends on fewer working royals, stronger public trust, and a clearer image of service. Yet the Sussexes represent the chapter that refuses to settle neatly into the past. They are not inside the machine, but they are not outside the public imagination either. And that creates a contradiction the palace cannot easily manage. If Harry is treated as completely private, many people will ask why the risks attached to his royal birth are being ignored. If he is treated too much like a senior royal, others will ask why someone outside the working structure still receives the visible weight of royal support. Between those two arguments sits a dilemma that goes beyond law or logistics. It is about the image of authority itself. Some royal watchers believe this is where William's influence becomes quietly important, not through dramatic intervention, but through the future he represents. The Prince of Wales is the living reminder that every decision made now becomes part of the inheritance he receives later. He may not need to speak publicly for his presence to be felt inside the conversation. His role alone changes the calculation, because monarchy is never only dealing with the present monarch. It is always preparing the ground for the next one. That preparation has become more visible in recent years. Public focus has increasingly moved toward William and Catherine as the central figures of the next chapter, symbols of continuity after a period of uncertainty. Their image is built around duty, family stability, careful public service, and the quiet discipline expected of a future king and queen. Against that backdrop, the Sussex question becomes more than a family disagreement. It becomes a test of whether the monarchy can keep its future narrative clean while its past conflict remains unresolved. This does not mean William personally directs every outcome, and no one outside the palace can honestly claim to know every private conversation behind closed doors. But as analysis, the direction is clear enough to matter. A future king cannot inherit a system full of blurred exceptions. He cannot lead a smaller monarchy if the public remains confused about who belongs inside the working circle and who does not. And he cannot spend his future reign reopening every wound that was never fully settled before he took the throne. That may be why the language around Harry and Meghan often feels so careful. There is rarely a complete emotional explanation. There is rarely a dramatic public rejection. Instead, the palace allows distance to speak through procedure, security systems, invitations, public appearances, and silence. The meaning is not always announced, but it is felt. For viewers who have followed royal history for decades, that method is familiar. The institution often moves most decisively when it appears to be saying the least. The deeper concern for Buckingham Palace may be that reconciliation, if it happens without clear boundaries, could create more confusion than peace. A warm photograph with the king and his grandchildren could be seen by many as a healing moment. But it could also raise immediate questions about whether Harry and Meghan are being drawn closer to the royal fold. A private meeting could remain private in intention, but not in interpretation. A security arrangement could be justified by risk, yet still read by the public as status. Charles's position is especially difficult because he stands at the meeting point of all these pressures. He is the father whose younger son lives across the Atlantic. He is the grandfather whose relationship with Archie and Lilibet remains limited by distance, security concerns, and unresolved family tension. But he is also the monarch responsible for maintaining the dignity and stability of the crown after a period of enormous change. Whatever he does will be judged through both lenses, and neither lens gives him an easy answer. If he reaches too openly toward Harry, some will say the monarchy is softening boundaries it once declared necessary. If he remains distant, others will say the family wound is being allowed to harden. If he leaves the matter to official systems, critics may argue he is hiding behind procedure. But if he appears to influence those systems, he risks making the crown look personal rather than impartial. That is the narrow path Charles must walk, and it may explain why so much of the story unfolds through quiet signals rather than direct statements. That memory follows every Sussex headline. It influences how people interpret motive, tone, and timing. A decision that might appear practical in another context becomes emotionally charged because so many viewers have already chosen where they stand. And that is why the palace must consider not only what is fair, but how fairness will be understood by a divided public. And if that interpretation is correct, then the current security debate is only the visible surface of a deeper royal adjustment. The palace may be deciding, slowly and carefully, what kind of relationship can exist with Harry and Meghan without unsettling the next chapter of the monarchy. Not a total rejection, perhaps. Not an open door either. Something narrower, more controlled, more defined by distance than warmth. But even that does not explain the most sensitive part of the story. Because once the monarchy begins defining who is inside, who is outside, and who can never return to the same place again, the question is no longer only about Harry and Meghan. It becomes about who understood, long before the public did, that the future shape of the royal family was already being redrawn. And that redrawing did not need to arrive through a proclamation. In royal life, the most consequential changes often appear first through patterns: who is seen, who is absent, whose name is used carefully, whose position is left undefined, and which conversations are allowed to fade without explanation. That is why this moment feels like a turning point rather than another passing dispute. The pressure begins with perception. For Buckingham Palace, public image is part of survival. A royal family can endure disagreement, but it cannot easily endure confusion about its own structure. If the public cannot tell whether Harry and Meghan are private relatives, semi-detached royals, or figures still requiring visible institutional accommodation, then every decision becomes vulnerable to criticism from both sides. That is where the palace faces its sharpest risk. Reports suggest that security concerns continue to affect a possible Sussex visit to Britain, but the larger consequence is what each outcome would communicate. If Harry arrives with Meghan and the children under highly visible protective arrangements, commentators may ask whether the relationship with the institution has softened. If the visit does not happen, others will ask whether distance has now become an accepted reality of the king's reign. Either way, the story does not remain private. That is why reaction around this issue moves so quickly. The monarchy may prefer silence, but silence does not stop interpretation. A private arrangement can become a symbol of reconciliation before anyone confirms it. A cancelled or delayed visit can be read as rejection before anyone knows the full circumstances. In the modern royal world, perception often arrives before fact has finished putting on its coat. For Charles, this creates a burden heavier than ordinary palace management. The king is being watched for signs of what his reign values most when family feeling and institutional discipline collide. If he appears guided by compassion, some will praise him for trying to heal what has been broken. If he appears guided by structure, others will praise him for protecting the crown from uncertainty. The same action can be judged as mercy by one audience and weakness by another. And in that environment, William's future becomes more than a background concern. The Prince of Wales may not be the public voice of this decision, but his coming reign sits behind every calculation. The monarchy Charles is managing today is the monarchy William must inherit tomorrow. That means the present king is not only considering his younger son, he is also protecting the future authority of his elder son. Was this about personal loyalty or about preventing the next reign from beginning with unresolved ambiguity? This is where the situation begins to accelerate. A monarchy preparing for the future cannot allow every emotional crisis to remain open indefinitely. At some point, the institution has to decide which relationships can be repaired privately, which roles can never return to what they were, and which public boundaries must remain fixed even when they cause personal sadness. That moment does not always look dramatic from the outside. It can look like silence, a lack of movement, or everyone simply continuing their duties. But continuation itself can be a message. When William and Catherine remain focused on their future-facing public role, the institution's center of gravity becomes clearer. When Queen Camilla continues beside the king in the rhythm of royal duty, the current reign looks steady. When Princess and carries on with the discipline that has long defined her service, the monarchy reminds viewers that its working core still moves forward, regardless of unresolved family tension elsewhere. The stronger that working core appears, the more difficult the Sussex question becomes. Their position becomes more clearly separate from the official direction of the House of Windsor. The more the monarchy presents itself as disciplined, compact, and duty-led, the less room there appears to be for ambiguity. If the palace is moving toward a future built on fewer, more clearly defined figures, then any exceptional arrangement around the Sussexes becomes more visible, not less. This is the turning point many viewers may miss. The question is no longer whether reconciliation is emotionally desirable. Many people may still wish to see a father, son, and grandchildren find peace. The question is whether reconciliation can happen without changing public expectations. Can there be warmth without restoration? Can there be family contact without royal symbolism? Can there be private healing without the world treating it as a palace shift? Those questions are difficult because Harry and Meghan's story has never stayed contained. Interviews, documentaries, memoirs, court cases, and years of commentary have made their relationship with the monarchy part of a global public archive. A single visit would be judged against everything that came before it. Even a gentle gesture could be pulled into the long argument over loyalty, truth, duty, and blame. For the palace, the risk is strategic as much as emotional. If the institution appears to reopen a door too widely, it may invite questions about whether previous boundaries were ever firm. If it keeps the door too narrow, it may reinforce the image of a family unable to heal. If it offers practical cooperation without emotional warmth, it may look cold. If it offers warmth without clear limits, it may look confused. There is no easy version of this outcome, only different kinds of consequence. That is why some royal observers believe the palace may prefer controlled distance over dramatic closure. Controlled distance allows family ties to exist without announcing a new arrangement. It avoids a public confrontation, but it also prevents a full symbolic return. It gives Charles room to remain a father in private while allowing the institution to maintain its public shape. Yet even that approach has a cost, because distance, once repeated often enough, begins to look less like a temporary condition and more like policy. The public perception shift has already begun. For some, the monarchy appears to be protecting itself with necessary discipline. For others, it appears unable to make room for human reconciliation. For many, the truth may feel more complicated. A king caught between private longing and public duty, an heir focused on clarity, a younger son still seeking safety and recognition, and an institution that cannot afford to look uncertain while preparing for its future. But even then, one question remains unanswered, and it is the question that could define the entire story. If the monarchy has already chosen clarity over flexibility, what does that mean for the possibility of healing? And what kind of royal family will be left when the public finally understands the cost of that choice? That cost is where the story finally settles, because the true consequence may not be one delayed visit, one security dispute, or one more difficult headline about Harry and Meghan. The deeper consequence is that the monarchy appears to be entering a phase where emotional repair must fit inside institutional boundaries, rather than the other way around. For generations, the royal family has depended on the belief that blood, duty, and national symbolism could remain tied together, even when private relationships became strained. But the modern monarchy is becoming more careful, more compact, and more aware of how quickly public trust can be shaken. In that environment, healing cannot simply be emotional. It must also be manageable, explainable, and safe for the future image of the crown. That is why the story matters beyond the Sussexes themselves. If the palace is moving toward a clearer separation between working royals and non-working relatives, then Harry and Meghan may be the most visible example of a wider transformation. The institution may still allow private family contact, private sympathy, and moments of warmth, but it may no longer allow those moments to look like a return to royal standing. In royal life, that distinction may seem small, yet it carries enormous meaning. For Charles, this may be the quiet tragedy of the moment. His reign has been shaped by transition, illness, grief, and the responsibility of carrying the monarchy forward. He may wish, as any father might, for the family story to soften before too much time passes. Yet the crown does not give him the freedom of an ordinary father. Every gesture becomes precedent. Every silence becomes interpretation. Every attempt at kindness risks being read as a shift in palace policy. That does not mean reconciliation is impossible. It means reconciliation may have to change shape. The old idea of Harry and Meghan returning to anything like their former royal position appears deeply complicated. But a quieter form of healing, away from balcony symbolism, public ceremony, and official expectation, may still remain possible if all sides accept that family connection and royal restoration are not the same thing. For Harry, that may be the most painful reality. He can remain the king's son, and still remain outside the institution. He can want safety for his family without changing the structure that now defines his position. He can hope for understanding while facing a system designed to protect continuity before emotion. This is the contradiction that has followed him for years. The monarchy helped create his public identity, but it no longer operates around his expectations in the way it once did. For Meghan, the meaning is different but just as significant. Her connection to the royal family continues to generate global attention, yet the institution's future appears to leave little space for ambiguity. If she returns to Britain, the world will watch. If she stays away, the world will interpret that too. Her absence and presence both carry symbolic weight, which is why the Sussex story remains powerful even when no official announcement has been made. And for William, the final meaning may be about inheritance rather than immediate emotion. The future monarch is inheriting more than palaces, duties, and tradition. He is inheriting the public memory of his family rupture, and a monarchy that must decide whether discipline can coexist with compassion without allowing the institution to appear cold. This is where the broader transformation becomes visible. The monarchy is asking how to define belonging in a smaller royal age. Who stands at the center? Who remains connected by family but outside the working structure? Who receives public support? Who carries official symbolism? A birthday message may be studied. A photograph may be interpreted. A family gathering may be examined for signs of warmth or distance. That is the unusual burden of a House of Windsor. Even the smallest gesture can become a national conversation. But perhaps the most important point is this: the monarchy may not be closing a door in anger. It may be narrowing a doorway in the name of survival. Some will see it as necessary discipline after years of public turmoil. Others will see it as a failure of family compassion. And many viewers may see both at once, because royal stories are rarely clean enough to belong entirely to one side. If reports about continuing security concerns are accurate, then the practical problem remains unresolved. But the emotional meaning has already expanded beyond protection. It now touches legacy, succession, public trust, and the future relationship between personal identity and royal duty. It suggests that the monarchy may be learning to live with separation rather than constantly trying to undo it. For years, the public has watched the Sussex story through the hope that one dramatic reunion, one private conversation, or one carefully arranged family moment might reset everything. But the longer the distance continues, the more the story begins to change. It becomes less about whether the past can be restored and more about whether the future can move forward without pretending the past has been healed. The royal family does not always resolve its wounds in public. Sometimes it absorbs them, works around them, and allows time to turn open conflict into settled distance. In this case, the cost is visible: a king divided between family and crown, a son still searching for safety and recognition, grandchildren growing up at a distance, and a future monarch preparing to lead a family that has already changed shape. So what should the public watch next? Not one dramatic announcement, because the palace may never give one. Watch instead for tone, access, and whether private family gestures begin to appear without public royal meaning. Watch whether Charles finds a way to be seen as compassionate without weakening institutional boundaries. And watch whether William's future monarchy becomes defined not by repairing every fracture, but by refusing to let those fractures control the crown. In the end, this story was never only about one journey, one security arrangement, or one hard decision. It was about the changing definition of royal belonging. It was about whether family ties can survive when official roles have been permanently altered. And it was about a monarchy trying to protect its future while carrying the emotional weight of its past. So what do you think? Was this simply one royal development, or does it point to a much larger shift inside the monarchy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep royal analysis, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next documentary-style royal story. Because in the House of Windsor, the most important changes are not always announced loudly. Sometimes they are revealed in quiet distance.
It's actually the people around the whole world logging onto Netflix last night to find not one, not two, but 3 episodes from the new Harry and Meghan documentary. And after years of speculation, we got to hear their side of the story, their relationship, and also what happens beyond the tabloid.
A single royal absence can sometimes say more than a palace statement. And now, as questions grow around Meghan's place in the monarchy's future, one figure stands at the center of the speculation: Princess Anne. Not because she seeks attention, but because when Anne appears to draw a line, royal watchers listen. There is a reason this story begins with the Princess Royal. Inside the British royal family, Princess Anne has long represented discipline, service, and the old belief that royal duty is not reshaped whenever public emotion becomes uncomfortable. She is seen by many as the keeper of order, the royal who understands that the crown survives not by explaining every private feeling, but by protecting the structure around it. That is why recent discussion around Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, has taken on a sharper meaning. Buckingham Palace has not confirmed any secret decision to erase Meghan from royal history, and no serious royal commentary should present that as fact. But symbolically, her position has become harder to read. She remains part of the royal story, part of the public memory, and part of the family by marriage, yet her active place inside the monarchy's future appears more uncertain than ever. This is not simply about one name, one invitation, or one palace record. It is about the difference between being remembered by the monarchy and being included in its future. A person can remain part of royal history without remaining part of royal planning. A title can remain visible without restoring the responsibilities that once gave it official meaning. And when that line is drawn around someone as globally discussed as Meghan, the consequences are never private for long. For Prince William, the Prince of Wales, that distinction matters deeply. William is not only Prince Harry's older brother. He is the future king, and every unresolved boundary he inherits today could become a test of his reign tomorrow. Some royal watchers believe his approach to the Sussex question is shaped less by emotion than by clarity. That remains interpretation, not confirmed private fact, but it fits a monarchy trying to become smaller, firmer, and easier for the public to understand. And this is where Anne's symbolic role becomes so important. If William represents the future of the crown, and represents the discipline that helped preserve it through decades of change, she has watched the monarchy survive scandal, divorce, grief, rebellion, and reinvention. She understands that royal affection and royal function are not always the same thing. A family may carry emotional history, but the institution must carry public order. That is exactly the distinction Anne has spent a lifetime embodying. The deeper question is whether Meghan's royal future has become a matter of emotion or administration. Emotion asks whether old wounds can heal, whether Harry can rebuild trust with his father and brother, and whether Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet can grow up with a meaningful link to Britain. Administration asks a colder question. Who appears in future planning, who receives ceremonial access, who carries official responsibility, and who stands outside the working structure of the crown? Those two worlds do not move at the same speed. Emotion wants space, forgiveness, explanation, and time. Administration wants categories, duties, and boundaries. Meghan cannot be treated as though she never existed within the royal institution, because she did. Her wedding, patronages, tours, and brief period as a working royal remain part of modern royal history. But history is not the same as an active role, and that is the line beneath the entire conversation. That is why even a shift in tone can feel consequential. It can appear through the absence of a role, the careful wording of a statement, or the simple fact that the monarchy's future seems to be moving forward without obvious space for a Sussex return. Royal life is often read through what is not said, and in this story, the silence around Meghan's future role has become one of the loudest details of all. King Charles III stands at the most painful point of that silence. As monarch, he must protect the institution he inherited. As a father, he remains connected to a son whose life has moved far beyond palace walls. As a grandfather, he is tied emotionally to children who carry royal names but live far from the daily rituals of the House of Windsor. Every decision around Harry and Meghan, therefore, carries a human cost that cannot be erased by protocol. Yet Charles cannot govern the monarchy, only through private feeling. That is the burden of kingship. A gesture meant as kindness can become a precedent. A private reunion can become a public signal. A softened boundary can become tomorrow's argument about status, protection, and privilege. The king may wish for peace, but peace inside the royal family must now pass through a world where every photograph, invitation, silence, and seating arrangement is interpreted as evidence of who truly belongs. This is why the story feels larger than Meghan alone. It touches William's coming reign, Catherine's role as a symbol of continuity, Anne's reputation for discipline, and Charles's struggle to balance family sadness with royal responsibility. It also touches Harry, because every conversation about Meghan's royal position ultimately returns to the brother who left with her, defended her, and now watches the institution continue without them. The most suspenseful part of the story is not whether Meghan's past remains in royal history. It does. The real question is whether her name still has any practical place in the monarchy's future imagination. Is she remembered as a former working royal whose chapter has closed, or is there still some narrow space for family connection to soften the meaning of that closure? Buckingham Palace has not publicly answered that question, and perhaps it never will in direct words. Instead, the answer may come through patterns. Who appears beside the king? Who is included in future ceremonies? Who receives public warmth? Who remains distant? Who is spoken of as family, but not shown as part of the royal machine? If Princess Anne's public image tells us anything, it is that the monarchy's old guard understands the danger of half-open doors. A half-open door can look compassionate for a moment, but it can also invite years of uncertainty. That is why this opening chapter begins not with spectacle, but with a line quietly forming. A line between past and future, between family memory and royal function, between the emotional wish for healing and the institutional demand for clarity. And once that line began to appear around Meghan's place in the royal story, the next question became impossible to avoid. Who inside the monarchy had the authority, the courage, and perhaps the burden to make that line permanent? That burden would not fall on one person alone, because inside the monarchy, authority rarely moves through a single voice. It moves through rank, tradition, timing, and quiet agreement. If a line is ever made permanent, it cannot look like personal punishment. It has to look like institutional necessity. This is where Princess Anne's reputation gives the story its first serious weight, and has never been seen as a royal figure who bends easily to sentiment. Her public life has been built on service, discipline, and the old belief that duty is proved by showing up. So when royal observers ask who would understand the importance of separating past roles from future planning, the Princess Royal becomes a natural symbol of that mindset, not because she has publicly announced any secret action, but because her identity is tied to order. And order matters more than many viewers may realize. A monarchy does not run only on crowns, balcony appearances, and grand ceremonies. It runs on diaries, protocols, invitations, patronages, precedents, access, and the internal arrangements that decide who belongs in which room, beside which name, and under which title. These details may seem dry from the outside, but within royal life they are the language of power. That is why any discussion about Meghan's future position cannot be reduced to whether the family likes her or dislikes her. The real issue is whether a former working role can remain symbolically alive after the practical duties have ended. If old references remain too active, they create expectations. If they disappear too sharply, they can look cruel. Between those dangers sits the palace's problem. Some royal commentators believe this is the distinction the institution is trying to protect. Meghan's historical place is not something the monarchy can honestly deny. She married into the family, carried out royal engagements, and became part of a defining modern royal chapter. But historical presence is different from operational relevance. The past records what happened. The future decides who is still being built into the next phase. For William, this becomes a question of inheritance. The Prince of Wales is not simply watching a family matter unfold. He is watching the shape of the future court being defined before his reign begins. Every unclear role today can become a complication tomorrow. If the next monarchy is expected to be smaller, more focused, and more disciplined, then it cannot carry too many unresolved arrangements from the past. A future king may need compassion, but he also needs a structure his household can defend. This is why the Sussex question reaches beyond Harry and Meghan themselves. It affects the working royals who continue to carry public service. It affects Catherine, whose position beside William is tied to continuity. It affects Queen Camilla, who understands how fragile reputation can be. And it affects Charles, because any boundary drawn during his reign will be judged as both a father's choice and a monarch's decision. Most of all, it affects the public's understanding of what royal belonging now means. Being royal by connection is no longer the same as being royal by function. A family tie may remain, a title may remain, and history may remain, but the working center of the crown may become narrower and less willing to carry